Okay, so in this video, we'll be setting up the models, the migrations, the factories, and the seeders for our project. And yeah, before working on that, I also want to show you the database structure of our project, because once you understand the database structure and the data flow in your project, then building out the features is not so hard. So yeah, here we have the classes data and the sections data, and each class and section are going to have the ID and name. And a section can belong to a certain class, and a class can have multiple sections. And we also have this students table, and this student is going to belong to a certain class and a certain section, and they have a name and an email. So yeah, we can go ahead and add in more features based on your needs, but for simplicity, we are just gonna deal with these tables for now. And yeah, this is the database diagram. Let's now go ahead and start working on the models and the migrations, and then we'll go ahead and set up the factories and seeders and the necessary relationships. So yeah, let's go ahead and open up our project, and let's start with the classes table. And the reason for naming this as classes is, if we name it as class, then yeah, it's gonna throw an error, because class is a reserved word in most of the languages like JavaScript and PHP as well. So yeah, we can't really use the keyword called class, and for that reason we are going to define this as a classes table as well as model. And yeah, let's start working on this. So the first thing that we'll define here is the class model. So artisan make model classes, and we'll also define the migration file for this. And while we are here, let's also go ahead and define the section model. Let's hit enter, and finally let's go ahead and define the student model as well. Okay, let's hit enter, and let's go ahead and open up the migration files for each of these. So the first one is the classes table. Let's go ahead and pass the name of this class, and let's open up our section migration file. Let's go ahead and pass the name for the section, and we also need to define a foreign key that is going to be related to the classes table. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So table for an ID of class ID is going to be constrained to the classes table, and we can define the foreign ID as class ID. So yeah, that makes sense. Let's open up our students migration file, and let's go ahead and define the foreign keys for this. So this is going to have the foreign key of class ID and section ID. So I'll just copy this and pass the class ID. And I generally like to define the foreign keys at the top, because this gives us the idea about the relationship that this table has. And yeah, we have the name and the email. So let's go ahead and pass that. And yeah, you can pass in other constraints like unique and all the other stuff. That's all up to you. But yeah, for now, I'll just keep it like this. And let's go ahead and now migrate these. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. But since we are also going to define the seeders and the factories, so yeah, we'll do that at the end of this video. Okay, so let's also go ahead and open up these models. So let's start with the classes model. Let's go ahead and define the fillable properties, and you can go ahead and define the guarded as well. That's all up to you. But yeah, for now, I'll go ahead and define the fillable property, and let's go ahead and do the same for our section model as well. This is going to have the name and class ID, and let's open up our student model as well. This is going to have name, class ID, section ID, and the email. So let's go ahead and pass that. Okay, and let's start with the factories now, since we are going to deal with the seeders. So yeah, we need the factories. So let's start with the classes factory. So PHP artisan make factory. Okay, let's define the student factory, and let's also define the classes factory. And finally, let's define the section factory. Okay, let's go ahead and work on this student factory now. And for others, we don't have to do anything, because we'll be populating these values from our seeder. But for the student factory, we need to pass the name and the email. So yeah, let's go ahead and pass those. And yeah, we could actually pass the classes and section factory, but yeah, the relationship is not going to be set up accordingly if we go this route. So I'll just go ahead and remove those. And for now, we'll just populate the name and the email. And for the class ID and section ID, we'll go ahead and pass those manually when we define the seeder. So yeah, let's save this and let's now go ahead and define a seeder for our classes model, and then for other models as well, we'll define those data from the classes seeder itself. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Artisan make seeder, classes seeder. Let's define that. And before working on our seeder, let's go ahead and define the relationships. So a class can have many sections. So let's define that relationship. And let's open up our section model and let's define the relationship of the student and the class. And since we are referencing this classes model, so by default, what Laravel is going to assume is, since we have this model as classes, so it's going to assume that we have a foreign key of classes underscore ID, but in our case, we have a relationship of class underscore ID. So if we have a different foreign key, in that case, we have to manually pass the foreign key, the name of the foreign key. So yeah, we can go ahead and pass the class ID as the foreign key in this case. And if we don't do it, then it's going to throw an error, because by default, it's going to expect a type of classes underscore ID. And in our case, we have a foreign key of class underscore ID. So yeah, we have to pass that. We need to let Laravel know that we have a different foreign key. So yeah, that's the reason we are passing this class ID. Let's also open up our student model and let's pass the relationship in here as well. And for the section, okay, we don't have to pass this section ID because we are following the convention for the section. So yeah, we can get rid of that. Okay, so the final thing remaining here is to define the seeders. We have defined the models, we have defined the migrations, we have also defined the appropriate relationships, and we have also defined the factories. The only thing remaining here is to define the seeders. And I also thought of creating a seeder for our users, because once we perform the migration, again, we have to go ahead and register a new user. So yeah, instead of doing that manual work, I decided to define a seeder, which is going to automatically seed some data for our users table. So yeah, let's go ahead and define a seeder for our users table. So artisan make seeder users table seeder. Let's hit enter and let's open that up. Okay, it is inside the seeders folder. We have the users table seeder, and I'll just go ahead and define a new array in here, which is going to seed some data. So the first array is going to be for the admin. And for now, we'll just define a single user. We don't need any other users. So yeah, let's go ahead and pass the name as admin. Let's pass the email as admin@admin.com and the password as the encrypted version of the default password. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. And finally, we also need to insert this data into the database. Otherwise, it's not going to work. It's not going to store that data. So yeah, let's go ahead and insert this data into the database in a single query. And we also need to import the user model. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. And let's now go ahead and work on our classes seeder, because yeah, this is the final seeder that we need to work on. And without this, we don't have the dummy data to work with. So yeah, let's go ahead and define that. And again, instead of typing this from scratch, this is a relatively more complex as compared to our users table seeder. So I'll just go ahead and paste it, and then I'll explain to you each line of code. And yeah, I'll explain to you what each line of code does. So yeah, let's go ahead and paste that. And before explaining to you all this stuff, let me go ahead and import all of the necessary classes. So yeah, this is the classes model. Let's import that. Let's also import the section model. And we also need to import this sequence class provided by the factory package. And yeah, everything else looks good. So what we are doing here is we are using the factory of our classes model, and we are defining 10 records for our classes model. And for each of the sequence, that is for each of the iteration, what we are doing is we are passing the name as the class space and adding 1 to each of the index. So as you know that for loops or any sequence in programming starts with 0, so we are adding 1 to that index. So for the first sequence, since the index is going to be 0, so we are naming our class as class space and then 1. And for 10 sequences, this is going to be ranging from 1 to 10. And again, each class has a section or multiple section, and we are defining 2 sections for each class by passing the count of 2, and we are passing the state method, and this will basically grab each of these sequences for each of the iteration. So since in this case we are defining 2 sections, so for the first iteration this is going to grab this sequence, and for the second iteration this is going to grab this sequence. And if we had, let's say, 4 sections defined for each of the class, then this would iterate between these 2 sequences. So for the first it would grab this name, for the second it would grab this name, for the third it would again grab this name, and for the fourth it would take this data. So yeah, sequence is basically iterating over all the possibilities for each of the iteration. So yeah, that's how the sequence thing works. And for our case, we are just defining 2 sections for each class, and the name for each section is going to be either section A or section B. And yeah, we are using the relationship in here called has, and this is going to store the section related data for each of the sequence or the iteration. And finally, each section has 5 students. Let's go ahead and import this student model. And again, we are using the student factory and defining 5 students for each section. Again, we are using the relationship of the section, and we have defined the relationship of student in our section model as well. We just did that. And again, we are passing the state, and for that state we are passing the array of attributes, and we are injecting the current section, that is this section that we are creating. Let's say for the first section this is going to have section A, and that section is being injected in here, and we are basically overriding the default attributes of class ID and passing the class ID of the current section model. And finally we are creating these records. So yeah, this is going to store all of these configurations into the database. So yeah, this is the whole configuration for our student table along with the classes and section tables. So let's go ahead and define these in our database seeder, otherwise it's not going to seed the data. So let's open up the database seeder and call these one by one. So yeah, we can define these by using the this call, and we want to first seed the user related data. The sequence doesn't really matter, but still we want to seed the users first, and then we will run the classes seeder. So yeah, that's done. Let's now go ahead and run the migrations, and let's also seed the data. So what we can do here is we can run artisan migrate fresh, and along with that we can pass the seed option, which is also going to seed the data. Okay, let's run that command, and we have some errors in here. This is probably related to the relationship. So insert into sections name and classes ID. So this is assuming that we have a foreign key of classes ID and where did that happen. So on the classes seeder, one table sections has no column name classes ID. Insert into sections, and let's try to look into the line. Okay, line number 41. Let's open that. Okay, this is actually the create method, so we can't really debug this. So let's open up our models accordingly. Okay, let's open up our classes model, and okay, from our classes model we are referencing the sections table, and we are passing has many section, but we have not passed the foreign key to this, and Laravel is going to assume that we have a foreign key of classes underscore ID in here as well, because we are referencing this relationship from the classes to the sections. So yeah, this is going to assume that we have a foreign key of classes ID, and that's the reason this is throwing an error. And as you can see, we are referencing our classes model and defining the sections relationship, and on our classes seeder we have referenced this accordingly. So yeah, I think this is the issue. So let's go ahead and pass the foreign key that we have in our sections model. That is, these two are referenced by this class ID. And let's now go ahead and give this a try. Artisan migrate fresh dash dash seed. Okay, seems like this worked. Let's now go ahead and look into this database in our database client. So I'll go ahead and open that up. Okay, so this is the database file. Let's go ahead and look into the classes table. And as you can see, we have classes from 1 to 10. This is the configuration that we defined in our seeder. And let's open up our sections table. So as you can see, we have section A and section B for each of the classes. So a total of 20 sections. And let's look into our students table as well. So here we have class ID 1, section ID 1 with the name, the email. So yeah, this looks good. And we have a total of 100 records in here as well. So yeah, this looks good. Our configuration is working fine. Let's also look into our users table. So we have a user of admin with the proper email and password. So yeah, this looks good. And in the next part, we'll be looking at displaying the data using the inertia view stack. So yeah, we'll define the table and start displaying the data. So yeah, that's it for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.